Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the South-South Dialogue on Sustainability Lecture Series of 2022. We provide English, French, English, Chinese simultaneous interpretation. You can choose the interpretation at the bottom of the computer screen. We would like to thank today's interpreters, Sandrine Alongi, Marie de Prasia, Huang Xiaomei, and Li Monghong. Apart from Zoom webinar, we are also doing live streaming at Bilibili, which is a very popular social media platform in China. There are thousands of young fellows who are interested in world politics and eager to learn from alternative thoughts and experience. May I first introduce the co-moderators for today's section. My name is Tsui, Jade, Margaret. I'm Associate Professor at the Institute of Rural Reconstruction of China, Southwest University, China. I am board member of Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives and a founding member of Global University for Sustainability. I have been actively involved in the rural reconstruction movement in China since 2000. Dr. Yan Xiaohui is researcher with the program on Cultures of Sustainability, Center for Cultural Research and Development, Lingnan University. He is also Executive Director of Green Ground Ecotech Center, Beijing, and Director of the Green Ground Alliance of Social Enterprise in China. Now I would like to invite Professor Lau Qingqi to deliver an opening remarks. Professor Lau Qingqi has taught 35 years in Lingnan University, first in translation and then in cultural studies. She is currently coordinator of the program on Cultures of Sustainability, Center for Cultural Research and Development in Lingnan University, China. She is also director of the executive team of the Global University for Sustainability. She has been involved in the rural reconstruction movement in China for over 2 decades. And she is also board member of Peace Women across the globe. Please, Qingqi.
Welcome to the South-South Dialogue on Sustainability Lecture Series of 2022. The South-South Dialogue on Sustainability is co-organized by Global University for Sustainability, Lingnan University, ARENA, and Green Ground Ecotech Center. The South-South Dialogue started 2 years ago after the convening of the 7th South-South Forum on Sustainability. We had 2 series of lectures in 2020, which were the first series of Venezuela in Struggles and Michael Hudson's series on Global Financial Empire, the Political Economy of Globalization. Hudson's series was edited with Chinese and English subtitles into 70 episodes and screened in China since April last year. It will also come out as a book in English and Chinese entitled The Destiny of Civilization, Financial Capitalism, Industrial Capitalism, or Socialism. Last year, we had the 2nd series of Venezuela in Struggles. We plan to produce a book based on the 2 series, published in 3 languages, Spanish, English, and Chinese. This year, on January the 20th, we started the first lecture series with experiences with indigenous communities in Chiapas, Cosmovision, and Sustainability. And we are most honored to have Javier Vargas and Catherine Saib Vargas to be the speakers. Today, we start a series on African people's struggles for liberation. We worked together with Dr. Firoze MANJI, the director of Daraja Press. Dr. MANJI is a very eminent scholar and also a founding member of the Global University for Sustainability. He and I have met many times in the past, working together with Professor Samir Amin. It was my greatest pleasure and honor when Dr. MANJI agreed to coordinate a series on African people's struggles for liberation, and with his broad network, he will be bringing other eminent African scholars to us. The list of speakers for the series is impressive. We will surely be learning much from perspectives alternative to Eurocentric perspectives. The Global University for Sustainability is a community of activist scholars from dozens of countries. Apart from analyzing the crisis of the pandemic, financial capitalism, and ecological collapse, we hope to learn from self-managing local communities in the global south and promote networking for ecological and socio-economic sustainability. So once again, many thanks to our speakers today and to all of you for joining us. So back to the moderators.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Lau. And now we would like to invite Dr. Yan Xiaohui to give his remarks.
Dear friends from all over the world, especially from Africa, or viewers on Bilibili, or and all the other members of the team, good evening for the time zone in China. It is with great honor that we open up this new series with SSDS. And just as Kenji said, in her brief of this series, we can see that most of you who are viewing this are on this streaming platform called Bilibili, a Chinese social network. And they have 130,000 followers on one of our accounts. So we have a good number of viewers for each series of us. The majority of them are youth. They pay close attention to the global south, to justice and fairness around the world. And in China, they are interested in sustainability and rural construction. We can see that it's fair to say that we are friends on the cloud. Apart from seeing all these streamings, there are also interaction of posting comments and questions in written form. And many of them also follow us on our updates of our new series of lectures. So it is our hope that with our series of lectures and streamings, more and more of you in China can have a better and more in-depth understanding of Africa. First of all, we believe we launched this series with a good number of questions, like how many of us here in China understand, knows Africa, know the people, know the residents there, and how do we view and support Africa? Our understanding may be limited, but still, how much of our understanding come from mainstream media and especially Western ones? All these are our questions. Once China and Africa have all been part of the third world during Chairman Mao's era, we call Africa countries our brothers. And today, to what extent does this name of brother still apply? Or is it already in the past and no longer the case? If not, why? And these are food for thoughts. Yesterday, I translated an article by Dr. MANJI, which we put up on our website. In this article, Dr. Manji said that the West always have already divided the world into two spaces: the sacred space, the holy space, and the sacrificed space. So our view of Africa already came in form because, or precisely on the basis of this divide of the two spaces. When some of us are under oppression, under exploitation, we feel the initiative and the urge to join hands and work together to struggle, to fight. But what are we fighting for? to become the victims of sacrifice into the sacred part. If that's what we want, it will make this unbounded structure more solid. So I believe this is great food for thought for whole series, for viewers of this series. If this structure is consolidated, the majority of this world will not get rid of this system. This system will persist. So our attention to struggles in Africa, or not just limited to that, to emancipation or to liberation in general, is for us to break free from this system or path that has already been set by the West. We should try to transcend this system, and we try to see it from a higher plane of humanity as a whole, or a community of common faith of humanity as a whole. To think about things in this way, we need to understand history. Likewise, we need to understand the history of Africa and their struggle for liberation and emancipation. It is our hope that we can work closer to the real Africa, one different from those in the media that has been interpreted and defined by the West. And it is our hope that everyone here can learn and think with us. And we thank all the speakers who are going to participate in this series.
Thank you, Dr. Yan. We are most honored to have Dr. Firoze MANJI and Dr. Yoporeka SOMET to be the speakers. Dr. Firoze MANJI is the course director. He is Kenyan, currently resident in Quebec. He is adjunct professor in the Institute of African Studies at Carleton University in Canada. He is also the director of Daraja Press, a publisher that nurtures reflection, shelter hope, and inspire audacity. He is the recipient of the 2021 Nicholas Christopher Guernan Batista Lifetime Achievement Award from the Caribbean Philosophical Association. He is also Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bush Academy, Berlin, visiting fellow at Charlotte College, University of Oxford, and associate fellow of the Institute for Policy Studies. He is the founder and former editor-in-chief of the prize-winning Pan-African Social Justice newsletters and website Pamasuka News and Pamasuka Press from Harwood Books. Please, Dr. MANJI.
The question I want to pose to you today is to pose the question of what does it mean to be African? Now, it may sound a strange question to ask. Perhaps we can have the first slide. So what does it mean to be African? I mean, I think it's very different to pose the question, what does it mean to be Chinese? Because China has long had a continental unity forged together as one state, but that is not the case in Africa yet. So the question is, what does it mean to be African? People often talk about African being their physical characteristics, the color of their skin, the size of their nose, the curliness of their hair, and so on and so forth, all of which are characteristics of what empire, what particularly British imperialism, did to try and define what they thought were Africans. And I want to pose here an alternative way of looking at the question, what does it mean to be African? What is Africa? And I want to base this on some statements made by Amilcar Cabral. Some of you may know that Amilcar Cabral was the founder and leading intellectual and organizer of the PAIGC, the African Party for the Liberation of Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde in West Africa, and was an extraordinary intellectual as well as a leader of a guerrilla war that successfully took over large parts of Guinea-Bissau before he was unfortunately assassinated. But let me go to the question that he posed. Next slide, please. He in a speech he made to his party members, he said, you know, we talk a lot about Africa, but we must remember that before being Africans, we are human beings. I think this is such an essential point. And you can see here that, you know, he says that we cannot allow, therefore, any interest of our people to be restricted or thwarted because of our condition as Africans. And then concludes, we must put the interests of our people higher. Next slide, please. As I said, there are three key components of this statement. One is, you know, being, before we were Africans, we were human beings. And secondly, the interests of Africa cannot be allowed to be restricted by that classification. And that we actually need to be aware that it is that we are part of humanity, and the struggles that we have been engaged with belong to humanity as a whole. And the reality is the lessons learned from the African revolutions in different parts of the continent have really been taken into account in terms of informing what we understand about liberation. Next slide, please. And yeah, so let me start with the first part, and that is, we talk a lot about Africa, but in a part we must remember that before being Africans, we were human beings. And to understand that, you know, what the term African was an invention of Europe, that it was effectively a derogatory term when it was first originated in the 15th and 16th centuries. Next slide, please. There's a lot of debate about what the origins, the etymology of the term African. And people, there's a lot of literature, people talk about Afri in Latin refers to people in the region of South Mediterranean, which is sort of more or less around Carthage. Some people claim that Phoenician origin of Afar, which means dust. There's Ifriqiya, the Arabic name for the region that roughly is Tunisia today. But there are lots of debates about that. What I want to try and do is to try and assert the political definition of what it means to be Africa. Next slide, please. There were some really important events which culminated in 1492. For some 700 years, and the Andalusian Empire, an African empire that occupied most of this Iberian Peninsula and Southern Europe, was associated with incredible scientific advances, a real expression of humanity. It was a place where Jewish people sought refuge from the land of savages, disease, and constant wars and racism that we call Europe today. Europe as such didn't exist. But in terms of being able to exploit the people of Africa, to be able to engage in enslaving people, for robbing them of their resources, and for creating the transatlantic slave trade, they had to have a word that summarized what that was. And it was the term Africa used as a word for the non-human or the less than human, because if you're not human, you can do all kinds of things to them. Just as Frantz Fanon, one of the great philosophers of Africa, described, just as whites invented the Negro, so in that process, they invented whites. To put it another way, by defining Africa and by exploiting and robbing Africa, was the basis upon which Europe invented itself. It didn't exist before then. And to just give you an idea of what a derogatory term it was, immediately after the Thermidor in the French Revolution, anyone who resisted the return to establishing slavery and the regime of white supremacy in the colonies was called an African. Okay, so this is at that period a derogatory term. Next slide, please. This was an attempt also to destroy the culture of Africans, but it was also one that turned into it was a signal failure, because what they did do, though, and people talk about the scale of enslavement. One of the really important points that recently Howard French has made is that this form of slavery that was invented by Europe to capture Africans was rightly termed chattel slavery. That is to say, this word chattel originates from the same word as cattle. And the distinction between this form of slavery and all other forms of slavery that we've seen internationally is that once you are a chattel slave, you will always be a chattel slave. Your descendants will also be chattel slaves, and their descendants will be slaves as well. In other words, there's a continuity. There is no way out of that, and this is exceptional in the history of humanity. And there were millions of lives lost, and I think one of the points that people forget is we can't just measure the number of people who were transported across the Atlantic, and those who lost their lives, who were murdered or thrown off into the sea. But the destructive effect of the enslavement, capturing people, result in barely 20 million lives lost on the continent. You can imagine that the impact was enormous, and even today, colonization was possible precisely because of the destruction that had been carried out, and it is something that Africa still continues to suffer the consequences of. Next slide, please. As the professor just mentioned, the European Enlightenment gave birth to liberalism and racism. These two terms are almost inseparable. They are the conjoined twins. And what was created was a concept in which there exists a sacred space for the elite white and those who were the privileged. and the rest of humanity was considered to be part of the sacrificial zones, the people who they considered not human or less than human. And just to give you an idea, people often talk about the birth of Western democracy in the US, but the reality we have to accept is that Western democracy has always been an exclusivist project. So that when it was born, only white male slave owners were allowed to vote. And any gains in democratic rights that has occurred since then has always been as a result of mass struggles for giving expression to humanity. Next slide, please. And what colonialism did, what enslavement did, what Europe did to Africa, was to make us leave our history. The moment that imperialism, colonialism arrived, it made us leave our history and enter another history. And it is the struggle today of returning to our own destiny as makers of history that was crucial. And it involved the direct and indirect liquidation of the essential elements of the culture of the dominated people. And violence is, the use of violence to dominate people is above all to take up arms to destroy or at least neutralize or paralyze their cultural life. For as long as part of that people have a cultural life, foreign domination cannot be assured. Next slide, please. If being defined as African was a derogatory term, what we saw was a major transformation in which slave rebellions took place in the Americas and on the continent, and indeed the slaves who had recently arrived in what was then called Saint-Domingue, in the island of Saint-Domingue, there was an uprising which led to the establishment of the first successful slave state in history. And that led to the Haitian, what became Haiti, the revolution that advanced further the concept of humanity as being the ultimate aspiration of any struggle, and it was there that the transformation took place. And what Toussaint Louverture and the others of that revolution pointed out, that in the victory that they've created, to be Haitian was not defined by any racial characteristics, but by the virtue of having struggled to overthrow the institution of slavery. Next slide, please. And I think we see this often in history, where people who are referred to by derogatory terms actually grab those terms and turn them into something really important and meaningful in terms of their own struggles. And so it was a process in which a derogatory term, Africa, was turned into a more positive idea. And the independence movements that arose, especially during the post-Second World War period, claimed always, they were all called African something. It was the party of the African Party for the Liberation of Guinea-Bissau. It was the Kenya African National Union. It was the African National Congress. It was the Pan-African movement. All these, all that use the term African in a way of saying that this is our, we are proud to be African, and that we are re-establishing our own history and becoming that our culture is that product of that history, just as a flower is a product of a plant. Next slide, please. And so the idea of being African and in these struggles for national liberation, the term African became intimately associated with the concept of freedom and emancipation. The very definition of African came to be viewed in political, not racial or ethnic terms. Cabral went so far as to draw the distinction between those whom he defined as the people and those whom he classed as the population, based on their political stance against colonialism. In other words, what he argued is that the people are those who are engaged in the struggle for liberation. The population is everyone else. And I think here he was very strongly influenced by the thinking of Chairman Mao. Next slide, please. I think the issue of culture is important here to recognize that it's not, as Fanon puts it, it's not folklore. It is the collective thought of a process of a people to describe, justify, and extol the actions which they have joined forces to remain strong, and that it is it cannot be divorced from the struggle for liberation. Next slide, please. And so I want to move on to the second part of Cabral's statement to his party, that we cannot therefore allow any interest of our people to be restricted or thwarted because of our condition as Africans. Let me explain what he tried to articulate there. Next slide, please. The rise of the liberation movements led to the seizure or at least the occupation of the colonial state as a symbol of independence. But what happened was that instead of taking the struggle further, the occupation of the formation of these independent governments was corrupted, in that the discourse of freedom and emancipation, which informed the national liberation movements, was replaced by developmentalism. In other words, where previously we were non-human and then became the poor, we were now considered as underdeveloped, even by the leaders of the movements who now were in the new governments that had been formed with independence. And what became very clear was the extent to which the state feared centrifugal forces and popular movements, whereas the popular movements were still calling for freedom for human. There was a strong suspicion of these movements, and we saw the assassination, disappearance of, or imprisonment of those people who still fought for for freedom. We saw in many cases the establishment of single party states, the elimination of opposition parties, and civil and political rights seen as a luxury. Next slide, please. all that said, I mean, it's important to recognize that in spite of that, there was that period of modernization that took place in that period, which did lead to incredible and very rapid. If you think about it, that in Kenya at the time of independence, there was no services for people apart from what the missionaries provide. There were no health services, there were no access to school, there were hardly any roads being built and so on. And there was a major transformation that took place in a very short period, actually in less than 30 years. And this was something that was analyzed beautifully by Surendra Patel for the UN wider report. Next slide, please. So one thing I think we have to be careful of, and that Cabral points out, is that the blame for what happened at independence cannot be placed entirely at imperialism's door. And he had this lovely expression, true, imperialism is cruel and unscrupulous, but we must not lay all the blame on its broad back. For as the African people say, rice only cooks inside the pot. I think that's a really important thing. I think one of the central failures, next slide, please, is that Cabral did not think that it was necessary or indeed right to simply occupy the colonial state apparatus and use it for their own purpose. You cannot use a tank as a hospital. It's built for a different purpose, and the colonial state was built to perpetuate the sacred and the sacrificial zones. And he argued it was not the color of the administrator that was the issue, he argued, but the fact that there was an administrator. And he was quite clear that you cannot preserve any of the structures of the colonial state. What actually happened was that even the liberation armies were incorporated not as the leading armed forces, but as only a part of the existing colonial infrastructure. So the judiciary, the police, even the laws, the army remain essentially the same, and were essentially, the only difference being that they were dressed up in the colors of the national flag. And Cabral argued that we're not interested in the preservation of any of these structures. It is necessary to completely, totally destroy, to break, to reduce to ashes all aspects of the colonial state. Unfortunately, he was assassinated soon after, and this was before he was able to lead the country to independence. And the big question remains, had he survived, would he have continued to destroy the state? What he did do was to create in 2/3 of Guinea-Bissau a completely different way of operating, a completely different democratic structures, a different trade structure. Even the Portuguese currency was banned, and they had alternative trade relationships in different parts of the country. And it was one in which each village elected its own governing board, in which women played a major and leading role. And it was this transformation that he'd already created before the country reached independence. Next slide, please. But once the term African was no longer associated with the emancipatory struggles, next slide, please. The struggle for reclaiming humanity. what's left is that the term African becomes purely a taxonomic term. And that means that if you can't define African in political terms, in terms of the struggle for emancipation, for reclaiming and inventing our humanity, then you're left back to the colonial structures, the apartheid structures, where people are defined not by their political struggle, but by ethnicity, by physical appearance, and so on. And so culture became no longer considered as a means of liberation. Instead, disarticulated from such notions and left empty of meaning beyond representing a caricature of some imagined past comprised of customs and tradition, consistent with the notion of the savage that still prevailed in liberalism and which provided fodder for tourists' imaginations. Next slide, please. As Fanon described it, culture never has a translucency of custom. Culture eminently eludes any form of simplification. In its essence, it is the very opposite of custom, which is always a deterioration of culture. Seeking to stick to tradition or reviving neglected traditions is not only going against history, but against one's own people. Next slide, please. So what we see is with the rise of neoliberalism in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a return to liberalism. And it's called neoliberalism for quite rightly, because it is a return to liberalism under new conditions. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the liberalism was intimately tied to racism and to the creation of the recreation in expanded terms in new forms and a new history of the sacred spaces and the sacrifice zones. And this is a period where we saw once again, as we saw in the early period of liberalism, the dispossession of land, dispossession of collective ideas of freedom, a replacement by individualism, the privatization of the commons, and dispossession of history and emancipatory ideas, identity as tribes, as national, as native authority, the glorification of self-aggrandizement, and the essentialization of identity, and African as ontology, not as something that was defined over a period as a definition of the struggle for emancipation. Let me turn now, next slide please, to the last part. And that is, what did he mean by we must put the interests of our people higher in the context of the interests of mankind in general, and then we can put them in the context of interests of Africa in general. Next slide, please. The struggle to invent ourselves as humans is relevant not just for those in the location in which the struggle took place. And that's, I think, really important to understand that these are of universal importance and have value for the struggles to claim and express humanity everywhere. A challenge to the Eurocentrism of many who assume that only the Western experience is associated with revolutions in France and America. Only those are relevant of relevance to the struggle for liberation. Note that in most of that history, the struggles of the Haitian Revolution are completely ignored. Next slide, please. And you know, those who have for centuries experienced dehumanization, inevitably, because of their location in the sacrifice zones, are constantly in struggle to reclaim their humanity, to assert the fact that they are humans. And the process of reclamation is not harking back to some glorious past, but rather a present, a continuing process of constant invention, constant reinvention, a redefinition constantly of what it means to be human. Next slide, please. So long as the experiences arising from emancipatory struggles are perceived as merely African, it is not possible to understand their contribution to universal humanity. That is only possible if the politics of African experiences are transcended and considered as part of the human condition that, as Cabral puts it, belong to the whole world. Thank you. Let me stop at that point.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, you try to redefine the meaning of Africa, and it draw our attentions to the not only liberation of African peoples, but also the whole humanities. And next we will have Dr. Yoporeka SOMET. He got his PhD in philosophy from University of Strasbourg in France, and PhD in Egyptology from University of Cheikh Anta Diop in Dakar, Senegal. He is associate professor at the Institute of General Studies, Duncan Kimati University of Technology in Kenya. He is also the director of the Center for African Resonant Studies. He is author of Africa in Philosophy and also introductory course in the pharaonic Egyptian language. He will speak on ancient African civilization. Please, Dr. SOMET.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you to Dr. MANJI for his presentation. I would like to go back to ancient history of Africa, as Dr. MANJI has presented, let's say, the evolution of contemporary Africa and what it means to be African and what it means Africa. So can you still see my screen? Can you all see my screen?
Yes, please, yeah.
Perfect. So what I will do is present and to bring you back in history, because precisely I do not talk about these parts. So my part is more about the history of Africa. I will start affirming that it was told by our dear colleague from China that spoke in the latest intervention that in China, Africa are some brothers. Well, it's the same thing in Africa. We see the whole humanity as brothers and sisters. Why? Simple. I will show you a map of the peopling of the whole world, of the whole earth from Africa. And this is based on the works from anthropologists. I am in a country when we say that everything started from here. I would quote a name, a searcher, because Africa is the mother of humanity, the cradle of humanity, and the cradle of first civilizations. So I would like to quote Dr. Muslike, an archaeologist, a British one, but a Kenyan citizen, born in this country, in Kenya. His researchers showed that there was a unique origin of humanity. And this origin is from somewhere around where I am, between Kenya and Ethiopia. Another name that is worth to be quoted, because in the 50s, we had a big majority of people reinforcing this theory. It was, of course, Dr. Champollion, born in Senegal, and his thesis is that Africa is the cradle of humanity, of the civilizations. There is a monogenetic origin, so from one single origin for the whole humanity, and it's an African one. So if you look at this map, you can see that the most ancient people are from Africa, and even the more recent one is on any other continent is actually more recent than the one we can find in Africa. So this idea of brotherhood, of universal brotherhood, is real. This is history. I would like also to say a few words about my presentation. So we will talk about different history periods in Africa, only taking into account the internal into the continent of the people of history, and not talking about Europe, where we talk about antiquity, Middle Age, modern time, etc. In Africa, we use another division, at least in 7 parts. The high prehistoric period, starting from around 3 million years ago, and going up to 200,000 words. So the apparition of what we call the Homo sapiens, with the discovery of the oldest ancestor relative of humanity. Second period, Neolithic, starting from 12,000 years before Christ, with the domestication of crops and of animals, the beginning of sedentary life, invention of agriculture, fishing, first cities, pottery industry. We have one very old reference in a town in Mali, Undugu, a pottery dating from 9,400 years before Christ. Also in the Niger Valley, we have proof of rice domestication 3,000 years before era in the region of Mopti. Third period, the Middle Age, starting from the 3rd millennium before era, with mainly the work of iron, copper, brass, bronze, gold, lead, etc. And the works of Etienne Zandago, an archaeologist from Central Africa, shows the existence of a metallurgy in the actual South Africa, dating from 2,200 years before our era. So you can see that this work of iron, this metallurgy, is not imported from Europe. It is autochthone, it is local. Fourth era, the antiquity, starting from 3,300 before era, starting from the writing, the invention of writing, and it would last to the 4th century of our era. So it's starting, as I said, from the invention of writing, the oldest one on the African continent. It's not the only one, but it's the oldest one. 5th period, what we call the African medieval period. So pretty much starting from the 3rd century after our era to the 16th century. So it is starting from the end of the Egyptian Empire and starting to the great empires in Africa. So we have all the empires, Aksum, Ghana, Mali, Shunai, etc. sixth era, the more dramatic one, corresponding to the slavery and to colonization, starting from the 16th century to 1960s, more or less, where it is the dates that we remember for the African independence. And we see a drastic decrease of the population. So you have pretty much an idea of what became of the continent during this period. So the demographers estimate that we have pretty much 800,000 people in Africa. It collapsed to 130,000 people around 1930. And after this date, we have less people than we had at the beginning of the 9th century of our era. So of course, we have a lot of consequences that can explain with different factors, of course, but it is a huge one of the actual situation we have today in Africa. Maybe also it will be an explanation of the mindset of the African people today. The last period in the contemporary Africa that Dr. MANJI mentioned, starting from 1960s to today. And I'm very happy of the example he mentioned in his whole presentation. Amilcar Cabral, you know him. Unfortunately, he was assassinated, but it gives you a good idea of what African history is, including with great figures that tried to push it to the highest point, especially with Mr. Cabral. So now, one of the first steps, Africa, the cradle of mankind and rationality. So here, what you can see is what we call the symbolic mindset, the expression of a mindset, of a thought through an artifact, an object that was made, crafted. And the first object that we recognize as an element that can translate this idea of rationality is in Africa. In the meridional area, so in Southern Africa, in Cape Town. And these objects were found in a cave, the Columbus Cave, where we can find several objects that were certainly used as jewels, was crafted 75,000 years ago. So we can find also this little stone with geometrical aspect. We don't really know what it means, but we do know that the humans wanted to translate something to express an idea with symbols. Also, another aspect of rationality and the creation of civilizations. Here you have this little artifact you can see on the left on the screen. This is the Ishango bone. So Ishango, as you can see on the map, is on Democratic Republic of Congo, close to the lake, Lake Edward. And these bones had some scratches on it, representing actually numbers. So we have several interpretations of these scratches. Some people thought it was a calendar, a lunar calendar. Others thought it was a way to calculate, so some kind of calculator. But what we can be sure of with these bones is that it is proof that we have the beginning of numbers. So this is Africa, the birth of mathematics. we noticed that the 9 first scratches were actually the way to use to count in ancient Egypt, counting from 1 to 9. And starting from 10, we use another sign. For example, for 15, we use this other symbol that looks like iron horseshoe. So this is actually a proof of the birth of mathematics. So here I'm talking about the period that was pretty much 20,000 years. So it's not just centuries away. We're talking about thousands of years. And here you have the birth of the cave art in Sahara and also in Southern Africa. The period here is 6,000, 3,600 before era, so not yet the beginning of the Egyptian and Pharaoh civilization, but the civilization before that. And we can see that we have some signs here, if you notice, will be reused by the pharaohs, by the ancient Egyptians in the hieroglyphs. Going a bit further, 1,000 years later, we are now at the end of the Neolithic. We have an industry that is more and more refined in pottery, as I said in introduction. The oldest pottery industry in West Africa, at least, is located in Malia, in a region in Malia, dating 9,000 years before era. Here we're talking about 5,000, 6,000 years before era, and you can see some very beautiful decorating, but also the beginning of jewels. And it's more important, the burial techniques. So it is meaning that there is a belief of a life after death, of an afterlife. And this technique is a lot older than the date we have here. Now we are getting to the beginning of history and corresponding to African antiquity here, the invention of writing in Kemet. And Kemet is actually the authentic word the ancient Egyptians gave to their country. The oldest hieroglyphic symbols were identified and discovered during excavations led by a German team, led by the archaeologist Gunther Dreyer in the 90s. And he and his team found pretty much 200 tablets similar to this one you can see in the tomb of a king that was part of the Zero dynasty, so before the first dynasty, 100 years before Mahmed. And this team found all these symbols, and it was obvious that they were used to mean something, to mean a sound, a letter, a series of sounds or a series of letters, depending on the principles of the Egyptian culture. I will mention a bit later. Here on the right, this is what we call the Royal Palate of Narmer, dating 3,200 years before era. For a long time, we thought it was the proof of the invention of the beginning of writing.
Dont j'ai parlé ici,
But
on a
Since the discovery of the tablets on the left, it's not considered as the beginning of writing, but it's actually a text, a full text, not just some letters, some words, a full and complete text that is considered as the constitution of the states of Kemet, emphasizing the unity, justice, and order. So this whole order to hold these practices and principles is what we call maat. It means what is just, what is ordered, what is going in the way of balance. And the opposite is chaos, disorder, injustice, what we mean that a society cannot work. And the person, the character you can see with the hand raised is supposed to repel and fight everything that is going against order, justice, and unity, everything that is going against maat. So this is what we call, so this is why we consider it is a constitution. So a few words about writing, which is one of the inventions, one of the majorest invention of the human mind. So Egyptian writing, as you can see on my screen, we mainly have symbols. So it's a pictographic system using images to express sounds. So one unique sound or double, triple sound. And from this, we can express a letter. So there is a link, a non-direct link between this system and the cave art I was talking a bit earlier. So the idea is a symbol. We use a symbol to express an emotion, an idea, a thought. And this is the principle of writing, at least in Egypt. So how does this writing works? It is composed of symbols, pretty much 1,000, a bit less, a bit more, depending on the eras and periods. And this symbol comes from the environment or the ecosystem of the Nile Valley. So we have birds, animals, human beings, items that we can find in this part of Africa, and we have almost no symbol that was taken from outside. Some words, yes, were taken from the Orient, for example, but no symbol, no hieroglyph. And as far as I know, I could identify only 2 symbols about on 1,000 that come from near Orient. So for example, the horse. For the people that know a bit about Egyptology, horse is the code E6, coming from near Orient. And the other symbol, C14, is a stick. A stick used to write, and to write the Asian word, actually. So this a glimpse of the basic alphabet, the main alphabet of the hieroglyphic symbols. You have here 29, so it's a bit more than the Latin alphabet, where we have 26. And this is, as I said, symbols, elements, can be birds, animals, human body parts, things that we can find in the immediate environment of the Nile Valley. And these 29 symbols can be used. You can see in red the sound or the letter. And this notation is just a convention. It's only used in Egyptology. if we had to rewrite, for example, this symbol, that would be a Q. Above, that would be the sh symbol, etc. You can use this to, for example, note all the sounds that we can express. For example, if someone is Pharaoh, you take this one, this one for the fa, F-A, then the T here, and the U, fatu, and you get fatu, and etc., etc. So as I was saying, there is a lot, 1,000 of signs. Here you have a medium of 800 we need to read and understand an Egyptian text. It was already classified by the ancient Egyptians, so we can understand it and work with it easily. So we have sections with classifications. So we have here a modern classification done by Alan Gardiner, a British Egyptologist. And we have a letter for each section. And then we have figures. For example, in section A, it is about man and his occupations. So you have A1, A2 to up to 55. And here on the middle image, we can see that the Egyptians did not invented this writing, but it was given to them by a god, the writing god of science, art, and letters, which is the Ibis god deity. The Greek called him Thoth or Thoth. You find both in Platon philosophy. And in West Africa, so the region I'm coming from, we also have these birds that is very similar to the ibis. We call the kalao, and the kalao in West Africa is considered as the bird of knowledge. So you can see a very close parallel with the ancient Egypt. I'm talking about West Africa, but it's pretty far from the Nile Valley, actually. So as I was saying, we have the invention of writing at the beginning of civilizations. It can be a formidable way to preserve the knowledge, also to increase it, and also to spread it. As long as what you have written here, for example, at the bottom of the screen, with this part of ancient Egypt text, it will be the Middle Empire, so 1,500, 600 before our era, we can still use it to understand. In Africa, we have oral tradition where we transmit the knowledge orally and also from generation to generation. But you also have this written tradition doing the same thing, but with a lot of certitude. Because people can disappear, but the writing remain. And the writing, this writing was also used as a way for reinforcing the governance of the state. I'm not sure it was specially created for this, for governance, but it was used. This writing was developed to its higher point by the Egyptian state. That was a way for them to improve governance, but also to preserve and spread out the knowledge. And of course, as I was saying, you have different system of writings in West Africa. So it's not the only one, it's the oldest one, but not the only one. What I would like to say here is to get your attention on the fact that the African ecosystem allows us to understand the Egyptian writing for all the signs. For example, for the signs that we do not understand, as I show you in the table with the different sections, A, B, C, etc. We have one at the end, the section AA. So this section is where we have pretty much 30 signs, 37, which is considered as the unclassified symbols that today in Egyptology we practice in Europe or in America. We consider that these symbols, these signs, are not yet unidentified, unknown. So, for example, we have this symbol. But if you pay attention, you will notice that this on this picture on the left, we have women in a southern region of Burkina Faso, the north of Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. So these women are on the top of a roof, layering on a terrace, and look at the tool they are using. This tool is very similar to the one you can see on the right, which is a symbol, an unclassified symbol. A symbol that is considered as unclassified and unknown. But I do know this symbol. I knew it when I was very young, and when I could have this possibility to start to learn the hieroglyphics, it was very clear for me. It was a familiar symbol. So this is how culture can help, especially when you're coming from this region, you know this object. And when I saw it in my studies in the hieroglyphic list, immediately I recognized it, just because I saw it, simply. So rather than consider it as a AA classification, I proposed a new code and to put it in the section that I used in the U section, which are instrument and hygiene and taking care of house. So this was my suggestion. So this is the proof that African culture can help us to resolve some enigmas. It was Jean-François Champoux who said that each sign is an illustration of a fact of civilization, and this is proof. So as long as civilization is known and shared, this symbol cannot be considered as unknown. So here, I am opening a perspective between the relationship on the languages and other actual languages in Africa. So for example, this symbol, it is an illustration that was found in a vizier tomb in the year 1,500 years before era. So we have the Rekmire ministry of a pharaoh, and inside his tomb we have this representation, and this symbol represents this one that is used to write the name of the country, Kemet, ancient Egypt. That means the black land or the black country, like we say black Africa today. So, and this symbol is said Kemet. In a Congolese language, Mosholi, we have the same word, Kama, means to be black. In Bambara, a language of Mali, Kari means something that is burnt to charcoal. In Wolof, in Senegal, Hem means black or dark. In Vai, in a language from Cameroon, we have Kembu, which means charcoal. And in Moré, a language from Burkina Faso, we have Kim, which means also to be burnt. So once again, we can see that this root from ancient Egypt was developed and shared in the rest of Africa. So actually, the languages I just mentioned and more languages actually share something with the ancient Egyptian that used this symbol. So this modern language, African language, and this ancient language are belonging to the same family, certainly with a common ancestor before the division of the countries. So now, starting the birth of states. Earlier, I said that we don't really know the relationship between writing and states. It's obvious that once the state was installed, it used the writing as one of its main way to governance. So the first, we have the Egyptian royalty. Today it is considered as the first political institution. We even have a French Egyptologist, Bernadette Menu, that considered that this kingdom of Egypt was the first state of law that we know. I mentioned the principle that every Egyptian king tried to realize in this country, this principle of order, justice, and balance. So math, what we call math. And these Egyptologists consider that a state that had these conditions is a state of law. So 3,000 years before era, we had the first state of law. It was the king Narmer. And all the followings, kings and kingdom, have in their name something that reminds the idea of bringing the good as a leader. And in the same time of this birth of this state, of this kingdom, we also have the origin of the invention of kingdom and royalty, because all these people you can see here are considering themselves, or were considered, as gods themselves. So they were here to realize in the society an order that was close to a divine order. So for example, in King Chaucer name, Chaucer means the sacred one or the holy one. For example, the king that we called Cheops, but it was Khmu. It means God protects me. And for King Saoure, it means the one that is close to God, to the sun god. So we have an association with the divine, with this objective that the universe, they are ruling, so above their territory, beyond their territory, the universe they are reigning on must reach this divine order of balance, of justice, of equity, of unity, etc. This ancient royalty used symbols and scepters that we still find today. So here we have the Royal Palate that was 3,000 years ago. So we can see several symbols and scepters with a bird or animal representation. And we can see on the right some kind of replica of these symbols for the Western African royalty, like for the Ashanti in Ghana or the Fong in Benin. So once again, these symbols of Egyptian royalty traveled around Africa until today. So in different regions and in different eras. But also it was found in other regions like Europe and Asia. Different signs here. So this bird, the falcon, which is considered in the ancient Egypt as a symbol of the pharaoh, the legitimate pharaoh. So the pharaoh can simply be called Horus, so falcon, that's the case here, and Horus Nebraka, and here Horus Jet for pharaoh Jet. And on the right, you can see, so it's not the actual king of Ashanti, but the father of the actual king. So Opuawe II had on his throne 2 falcons, just like in ancient Egypt. So it's not just for the royalty that we can see this similitude. Here, you can see the scepter that the pharaoh has in his hand. And this same scepter is used once again in the Mossi kingdom, with here the actual king. Look at his scepter, the same symbol. And this, we have here, this scepter is what we call the Eka. And the word Eka means to govern or governor. So the scepter is a symbol of the leader. And the pharaoh has a title here, which means word by word, the master or the king of the universe. And the title of the actual king Mose, Moro Naba, literally, it means the same thing, king or the leader of the universe. So Moro is the empire, and by extension, it is universe, and Naba means a king, like Neb for the antique Egyptians. Now we'll see that we still have pastyle and headdresses, and the way to present our hair that is still being used. So here we have a queen of the 18th dynasty, so 1,600 years before era, and today we still find the same hairstyle, headdresses for men and women in Africa. So about this, for the people who are interested, I have an article written by an archaeologist, an Egyptologist from Belgium in the 50s. It was a book about the African origins of the headdresses. So actually, this hairstyle wouldn't even be an invention of the antique Egyptian, but it will be even older. So talking about ancient civilization of Africa, I really insisted on antique Egypt because it is the longest one, 35 centuries, and also the most documented one, with the lot of texts that we have that did not disappear with time. It's not the only one. We can talk about the Napapa Kush kingdom. Some specialists make a difference between this entity and Egypt, but actually the Kushites of the king that we have here never considered that they were different from the Egyptian one. So this is why the creator of this kingdom, Kianke, maybe you heard of him. It's written here in hieroglyphs. This king won't have a lot of reign because they have at least 5 names, one of birth, reign, and 3 more names. I won't insist on it. And his reign name, he took it from a pharaoh that reigned before him, an Egyptian pharaoh. So this is why I explained that they do not consider it was 2 different entities and 2 different countries. It was just the following of the country. So he uses a name, Thutmose III, that reigned 1,500 years before Hira until 1,040, 50 years before Hira. So 800 years before him, he used he took back this name. So we have this continuity of history. Few more kings of Napata and Kush. And these kings will also keep the same names, royal names, just like the other Egyptian dynasties. We have no rupture between the 2. We just have a continuity of a common culture. We have now a different step, different period, from 250 and 75 years before Hira to 300. So we have the Meroi Empire. The main characteristic of this empire is that this empire will have its own writing that for now we call the Meroitic, but we can read it, but we do not understand it yet. We do not yet get the meaning of what we are reading. So what we will need, there is a lot of work ahead of us, especially for the following generations. We have to study the languages that are being used in this part of the world, which is the Sudan, because it may help us to understand the meaning of this Meroi language. Another characteristic of this kingdom is that the woman has a very central position. I don't know if you can really see on my screen, but in these representations, we have queens, all feminine representation that have the Kandas or Kandake title. So I really want to highlight this on this day of the March 8th, the Women's International Day, because in we have this importance of the woman at the central position of the society in some countries in Africa, because as said in previous president of Burkina Faso, President Sankara, he said that in the dominated countries, it was a lot of the case for African countries, women has a double domination by the system that dominate this part of the world, and also by the man that is dominated by the system. So another aspect of the Meroi Kingdom, we have, like I said, a continuation with the ancient Egyptian representations, with the god, the hieroglyph, and one curiosity with these techniques of the pyramids constructions. It was abandoned or lost in ancient Egypt at the end of the ancient empire, so around 2,400, 500 before Hira. The Egyptians do not build pyramids anymore, maybe because the technique was lost. This is one of the major theory, but curious thing is that we find this technique 500 years later in Sudan. So of course the pyramids here are smaller, but they're also more numerous. We have pretty much 200 pyramids against 80 on Egyptian territory. Next, and I will finish with this Meroi aspect. So we have pottery, ceramic, and also the industry of glass. That looks like what we know today. It looks very much to a glass of champagne. Also have the work of iron, copper, gold. Here we are getting close to the 1st century of the Christian era. And we are the southern part of Meroi, so Ethiopia. And you can see here what we could establish during the ancient empire, this architecture in stone. Same thing here with this obelisk of Aksum, which are funeral monuments. And here at the bottom, we do not have this cut stone construction, but the construction in stone itself. Here we have a church. You have several like this that are cut inside the stone, actually. This is very similar to what we can find actually in Orion, or also in Egypt, in the King Valleys, where the tombs are cut right into the stone. Here on this map, we are getting to another step. The African equivalent of Middle Age, even though this period is not the same. So we are in a period with big kingdoms in Western Africa between the 3rd century and the 16th century. The first of this empire is the Ghana Empire, starting after the Meroi kingdom. Then we have the Kingdom of Mali, following the Ghana Empire. Then we have the Mossi Empire. So the dates are just an estimation because it's still being discussed today. I just put here the 13th century, but my sources already say that it was starting from the 11th century. And I say that the empire we have still today, we have a king in Ouagadougou. So we still have this Mossi Empire today. So it's a very long empire. Then we have the Songhai Empire, starting from the 15th and ending at the 16th. There's a very interesting aspect here regarding the Ghana Empire. It was created what we call the Soninké. There would be, they say there are migrants that came to Ouagadougou with the Kumbisale as a capital, and they came from a place they call Sona, and Sona would be in Misare. It is a name of ancient Egypt in Arabic, and Sona would be Aswan, actually, so the place where there is the temples. And in the oral tradition of these people, they say they were guided to this new land that you can find here on the map. They were guided by three famous animals: a vulture flying above their head, showing them the way, a cobra to protect them, and above all, a jackal, the black dog of the Egyptians, that is named Uwau, opening the way. So this jackal was also showing the way with the vulture and the cobra. So this is how the oral tradition could be the link between these two parts of Africa, ancient Egypt and Western Africa. So this is what I was saying, the Empire of Ghana with the migration that would be starting from the Nile Valley, from Sona or Aswan. This empire would have lasted pretty much 1,000 years until the arrival of Sunja Keita, the Empire of Mali. The specificity of this empire is that it has elaborated what we consider today as a charter of the human rights. I will say a few words about this. This empire is also considered as would be the homeland of one of the richest men of the world, Mansa Musa, that would have make a pilgrimage to the Mecca in 1450 with like 10 kilograms of gold. And today we can be wondering about the origin of this richness and is it relevant for this wealth to be in the hands of one man? So quickly, what I mentioned, the MANJI Charter, we have 7 articles. I will quickly talk about the first one and the last one. So the first one say that every life is a life. It is true that a life comes into existence before another life, but it is important that no life is more ancient or more respectable than any other, and no one's life is superior to another. So we have here an affirmation of the equality of humans. And Article 7, we have more precisions about the first one. It say that what is defining a people as a human, it's the flesh, the bones, but also the soul. His spirit lives on 3 things. He must see what he wishes to see, he must say what he wishes to say, and do what he wishes to do. So freedom of thought, of speech, and of action. And this article concludes, we have a conclusion of this charter with this affirmation. This proclamation is the oath of the Mandan, not just to the people of the Mandan, but of the whole world. So this is here an affirmation of the universal aspect of humanity. What we already saw in the Egyptian civilization, this text of 1232 is the first human rights charter. So quickly, before concluding, I'll talk a few more about kingdoms. I insisted a lot on the Western kingdoms because there's one that I know the most. But here you have the kingdom of Monomopata. We have this architecture that was found by European archaeologists that wanted to know who could have built this type of architecture. So they were looking for the Phoenicians. For them, it could only be Phoenicians to build this, and not African people. So we still have these debates today. For the civilization I was just talking about. For us, we have a different perception of humanity. Then here on this map, you have a glimpse of the whole Africa before the slavery, the beginning of slavery. So we have very organized states or kingdoms that would have given a different organization of Africa if we did not have this next step, which is this one, the slavery that really stopped the evolution and African emergence that we had. I'm just talking about the demographic aspect here. Look at the population, this graphic. This graphic is from this book, Black Africa, Demography, Crown and History. And this book is very useful if you want to read it to understand a bit of Africa. I recommend it. Not just history, but also the modern aspect of Africa. It's a very good book. So the writer is a demograph. I know no other works from that gave such an understanding of Africa from the very early history to today. So this is what we can find and discover with this graphic. With when you read this study, we can consider that around 800, so the Ghana Empire, we had an African population a bit less of 200,000 people, reaching with a highest hypothesis. Yeah, millions, sorry, it was millions of people. So we would have had 800 million people at the beginning of the 17th century. And the lowest hypothesis would be the 600 million. So let's take this one. At the beginning of the slavery, we have 600 million people in Africa. And this population collapses, but not just collapses. It reaches less than 200 million in 1900. So how can we explain that? How can we explain that it's just a genocide? And this author used a word that's not stronger, but is different. It's a mass murder and an attempt to history killing and historicide. So the idea is to genocide, but also to erase history. And what I'm thinking is, what does this dramatic collapse of population may have left to the African people in terms of the management of his destinies? That could be a very personal hypothesis, true, but when you go from 800 million to 130 million inhabitants, the only thing they want for these people is to survive, to save their lives and save the day without going any further, looking for the future. I don't know, maybe that could be a theory and a very interesting hypothesis. Wouldn't be it one of the hurdle we have in Africa to develop? Maybe that could be an explanation to this dramatic situation. We have this psychological scar in the mind of the people. So now my conclusion. Africa history is actually a history of struggle. We're not just victims. In every history, we had Africans fighting against this injustice. Here you have a few. Here you have 12 figures. I just realized after my presentation, but we have 2 of these people that were not born on the African continent. So we have Sojourner Truth and Ferry Douglass. They were born as slaves and they died as free people. All the other people, one exception, which is King Menelik II, born in Ethiopia, all of them were born as free people We have here Anthony William Amo, an intellectual and philosopher, Toussaint Louverture. All of them, except these two, Samori Touré and King Benanza, Abdelkader, Amo, all of them died in detention. They did not die as free people, but in detention. Samori Touré in Gabon, King Benanza in exile in Algeria, Salvatore III exiled in Algeria, Abdelkader exiled in Syria, Toussaint Louverture exiled in France, and Amo, he was free in Germany, and he was detained where he died. And finally, Shaka is assassinated. Though the only one dead as a free man is the Ethiopian Menelik II. It is also one of the only person who the country was not colonized. I just want to finish on these words. Here, for your information, a bibliography, a selective one, if you want to know a bit more. So you have books in French, in different editions. You also have some in English, pre-colonial Black Africa, and the African Original Civilization. You have more books here, more general, about the history, languages, slavery, slave trade. It was Joseph Inikori who wrote it. And some more books published by the UNESCO, also available in English or any other languages. So thank you very much for your attention.
And now we have over 2,500 viewers at Bilibili. I typed the link. If you have another mobile, you just click on it and you will find that there are quite a lot, over 2,500 viewers. And I collect some questions for both of you. And I will, I type it in the chat room. I will spit it out. Professor Manji called Amilcar Cabral's writings, and it is said that Cabral is as great as a thinker as Fanon. Could you please highlight some of the most important theories of Cabral? And the second question, who killed Cabral? There are different versions of the assassination of Cabral. Was this orchestrated by the Portuguese colonial powers? The third one, could you explain more the experiment of community organization that tried to break away from the state structure of the colonizer? The last one, Professor Amin always reminds us of the spirit of Bandung. What is your opinion about the creating a different international order? For Professor Somet, was Egyptian civilization influential for other parts of Africa? Professor Somet, given the diversity of African cultures, how would Pan-Africanism be possible? What could constitute the base for Pan-Africanism? The last one is a comment and also question. I visited the British Museum. There are many African stolen artifacts. Is there any campaign to ask the museum to return them to the African people? Yeah, okay, please, yeah.
First of all, I'd like to just congratulate Dr. Yoporeka SOMET for an excellent presentation. I think one of the things that he has pointed out is these diverse civilizations across the continent. What is interesting is that in that period, the idea of Africa didn't exist, but people had names for where they were. And almost in every case, the names actually, when translated, meant people, humans, human society. That's really important because it is the basis for claiming one's humanity, which has been denied so extensively. Cabral, I think, was deeply influenced by Fanon, and I think that in terms of theory and in terms of praxis, it was his success in creating the movement for liberation. Remember that he was a founding member of Frelimo as well as of MPLA in Angola, Mozambique, and he had a very profound understanding of what it means for ordinary people to be able to organize, to be able to reclaim and become actors in their own destiny. In terms of his theory, I think I've highlighted some of those aspects in my talk, and that was that he had this understanding that theory is fundamental. He saw himself deeply influenced by Marx, but not by dogma, but of reinterpreting and understanding that it is from the cultural aspect, the real fundamental experiences of people that that theory has to originate. It can't be in just some sort of abstract form. And I think his writings on culture are probably one of the most important writings from Africa around the influence of culture and its role in liberation, and some of which I touched upon. Cabral was assassinated. There's a lot of claims that it was the Portuguese PIDE, the secret police, who were involved. Since then, there's been a lot of information come out. Cabral was assassinated by his own comrades. Okay, betrayal always comes from within, and one looks at the history of the struggles for liberation in Africa. Betrayal always comes from within, and one looks even more recently at stories of Thomas Sankara. You have the same story occurring of being assassinated from within, and the story goes that when he was shot by one of his comrades, or a group of them, that his last words were to say, "This is not the way to resolve differences, comrades." And he was then shot several more times and killed. I think, what that represents is this problem that we have, that the conscious, the realization that the occupation of the state is a place of massive accumulation and privilege. And I think his assassination was a reflection of the aspiration of a group of people who wanted to take the new state and see it as a source of private accumulation. I think Samir Amin was absolutely right in the need for a transnational cooperation of a forming of a new way of organizing that was not simply an elitist group of left-wing people, but which brought together people who were in struggle, whether it's in the peasant movement, in the workers' movement, and the women's movement, and so on. And I think that dream is really important. Bandung had its role in its time, but Marx's famous saying, first time as tragedy, the second time as farce. We don't want to recreate Bandung. What we need is to say, in terms of what the current world it looks like, we need to look at what kind of alliances internationally can be made. if it's of interest to the organizers, we have one space left which we have not been able to fulfill on the 22nd of March. And if we are not able to fill that with the people we were hoping, then I'd be willing to do a presentation on Samir Amin's thinking around the creation of a new international. Let me leave it at that.
Thank you very much. And please, Professor SOMET.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai une série de questions.
Thank you very much. So we have a lot of questions, so I will go quickly on the first one that was asking if the Egyptian civilization had influenced other African civilizations. So I think that in my presentation, I showed that we have some parallels, some links. So how can we consider this? That can be an influence, on a hypothesis. Another one is, I did not insist on it, is the common origin. I showed that humanity today can have diversities in the person, so we do not look like the same, can be men, women, black, white, etc. But are these differences that would be the core of who we are? No, the core of man is not the hair, the color of eyes, of the skin, it's something higher. So if this unity is true, I quoted two major archaeologists that were the first one to affirm this thesis, and they were the first and the only one at the time. Everyone was against them. So if this unity is real, at the world scale, of course it is the case also in Africa. However, Africa is big, 30 million square meters, close to 2 billion inhabitants, but there are differences. There is diversity. Personally, I was born in West Africa. I read a lot about African civilization that I do know, and I still was surprised arriving here in Kenya, where I am right now, so Eastern Africa, to discover cultural facts from my place, from my home. I knew this thing on the theory, but I was very surprised to see it. So we, of course, have differences in language, but if you go deeper, for example, someone explained me here that in the language of the people here is the Kikuyu, and they use the same word oka'a to say, come here. In my country, they say waka. So you see, there is a big similarities beyond the diversity, beyond the diversity. We still have something. There is a link. I'm sure of it. From my experience in Africa, the first time I come here in Eastern Africa, but there is more. We also have our history, the continent history, because even though we were very different, what happened to us should have consolidated us, made us more solidary. We suffered together. We have suffered together. We have to be closer than brothers. This is a link we have in Africa. Africa is a whole. It's a block. It's not a multitude of islands. It's just one block with a few islands. But we have a diaspora, and the sons and daughters of Africa that left not willingly because of this tragedy I mentioned now belong still to Africa. And the idea is to consolidate this link to maintain survival, because we have still the threat of disappearing today. Look at what is happening today. There's not just one country that is trying to destroy us. So we have to prepare to know not to let anyone destroy us, because it was attempted in the past. Africans are lucky because the same thing was done in America about on the autochthon indigenous people that disappeared. We do not realize that the actual inhabitants of the Americans are not native or very small minorities. That today, the people that arrived in America took this continent, eliminating the people. It did not maintain in the human history, and it's wrong. And I think that Africans, despite their differences, and we have to take it into account, can just have to behave to protect themselves, to protect their continent. So this is what to answer to the ancient African civilization, the diversity, etc. And for the idea of Pan-Africa, it's not a warfare idea, even though these ideas can be used in very marginal groups. But for the people that are calling themselves from this group, first of all, want to survive, want Africa to survive, and also to have a voice. I mentioned the universal values. Remember the Mali period. I did not mention it in the Egyptian period, but it was still here. The pharaoh was called the master of universe, so his role was to protect the whole universe. I'll finish on the stolen artifacts. So these stolen artifacts, I am a father. I have a 10 years old that goes outside and come back and have his bike. I did not buy this bike. What should I do of this bike? I take it and I say it's mine. It's what the Europeans are doing. This is what they did. I did not say to my child to come back with a bike. So maybe if it was from a friend, well, you have to give it back. But please tell me you did not steal it. But if it's not mine, you should give it back. I think it's a principle. And the Europeans know it because they gave back, for example, artifacts that were stolen to the Jews by the Nazis. But here today, we have to remember that Africans loved the war. We repaired, we gave back the artifacts, so it should be the same for the Africans, and not in small bits. That's a principle. Then we can mention the form, the shape, and see how, but the principle is there. And moreover, the French President Emmanuel Macron promised to Ouagadougou. I said that people are coming, my parents are coming from this place. He promised to propose about to have proposals about these questions. We had agreements with universities. Bénédicte Savoy, an anthropologist, a French citizen, have a very clear report. They identified the artifacts, like thousands of pieces, and they should be given back. Not just a few objects, but all of them. Like I said, this stolen bike, should be given back to the family, and not just, for example, the wheels. Because if not, we're changing the whole paradigm. We consider that stealing is okay, is legal. So this is what I wanted to say about this question. We had some pieces that were given back. For example, the Italians, I gave back to Ethiopia some artifacts. Recently, I think it was last month, to Benin and Senegal. But the principle is to give back all the artifacts. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we also fight together for the social justice. Apart from the loving your the ancient civilization. Yeah, and then we still can't forget the current looter or the struggle in reality. Yeah, thank you very much for both speakers. You give us very excellent presentation. Thank you very much. And now it's 11:10 p.m. in China, but we still have 2,800 people in the audience watching the live streaming with Chinese interpreting. So we feel very excited because still quite a large group of people listen to Africa. So we hope we continue to establish our friendship with African people and intellectuals. And now we will upload those the recording. After editing, we will upload to Global University website, and we already upload the Professor Summit papers in the website. So although it's in French, but anyway, I think we hope we all can mobilize more volunteer to do the translating, to do the translation, and promote the what happened, to present the reality in Africa. Okay, once again, thank you very much, and we hope we will see you again. Thank you very much.